Can Avengers Doomsday clear the $2 billion mark? What other multiverse heroes from Marvel's past will appear in Avengers Doomsday? Why did Forbes lie about Superman? Those are just some of your burning questions that I've selected for this edition of Ask Colton. Hey everybody, Colton here, and this is the mailbag style show where I take your questions about Marvel, Star Wars, DC, movies and streaming in general. Whatever you want to ask, send it in at the email address askcoltonnow@gmail.com, and hey, maybe you'll see your question featured right here on the show. And guys, I get a lot of questions sent to the mailbag, and I wish I could answer every single one of them, but sometimes I just cannot get to them all. But if you are a channel member, that does guarantee that you get one of your questions answered right here on the show every show. So if you want to support the channel in that way, it is very much appreciated. And remember, the show is now on Spotify, Apple Podcast, all the podcasting places. So please, if you've got a sec, give the show a download. It really helps us out a lot. All right, let's go ahead and get into our first question. Mark asks, do you think Avengers Doomsday is going to join the $2 billion club, or will it be lucky to make $1 billion with the current state of the MCU? All right, thank you so much for that question. So I'm going to tell you why I'm really confident in my answer on whether or not Doomsday will cross that $2 billion mark. But first, let's recap where we are. So Avengers Doomsday, it is arguably the most important MCU film ever. This movie and its success or lack thereof could make or break this entire franchise. It's no secret that the MCU, it has certainly taken a bit of a step down from the consistent bangers and the overall quality that we had come to expect after we got win after win after win with the Infinity Saga. I mean, especially, you know, with phase 3 of the Infinity Saga, I can't think of a single movie in that saga that wasn't great. And they all killed it at the box office. Phase 3 made a whopping $13.4 billion in total at the worldwide box office. And the same, unfortunately, just cannot be said for the multiverse saga. Now, it certainly is not doing bad at the box office, especially compared to all films, but when you compare it to the Marvel Cinematic Universe and what they had come to expect at Marvel Studios, the MCU, right now, the multiverse saga, is not breaking any records either. Part of that, of course, has to do with the pandemic plaguing Phase 4, but even during the pandemic, films like Spider-Man No Way Home cleared nearly $2 billion. But it's no secret that No Way Home and Deadpool and Wolverine, as we'll talk about in a second, they have kind of been outliers, I guess you could say, for this saga. So let's break all that down. Now, you could say that there are really 3 reasons the MCU has found itself in this current state. One, and this was unavoidable really, the end of the Infinity Saga was the crescendo. It was the point that we'd been leading to for 10 years worth of storytelling. And there's really nowhere to go but down from that point in terms of scale. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to have a drop in quality. That doesn't mean that just because you need to reduce the scale so you can build back up, that doesn't mean that a drop in quality was inevitable. But it does mean that a drop in, I guess you could say, stakes and having to go back to the drawing board and build up to a new big culmination event, that was going to be necessary. And with that comes an expected drop in box office. Of course, Infinity War and Endgame, they made the money they made, not just because they were two really great movies, but because of the movies that preceded them. The Infinity Saga films that built up to that moment are why Infinity War and Endgame made the money that they did, even though those films that led up to Infinity War and Endgame made nowhere near the amount of money that Infinity War and Endgame made. Now, reason number 2 the MCU is struggling is they made too much stuff for the multiverse saga. Even if every single thing that they had put out this saga had been great, there still just comes a point where you're just releasing too much and it becomes homework to keep up. I've even applied that to my YouTube channel and others' YouTube channels who ask me for advice. You don't want to put out too much stuff. Now, that doesn't mean you can't post daily. Posting daily is fine. But dependent upon the channel, it gets dangerous if you're dropping like 6 videos a day. Now, if they're shorter videos or maybe like news topics, that's more understandable, especially if you're covering the news. That is totally more understandable. But if you're putting in a lot of time and effort into a really like quality, like video essay type thing, you don't want to drop too many of them because you want to give people time to watch the one you made. I mean, people only have so much time to dedicate to the media that they consume, and you want them to consume your stuff. So if you put out too much stuff, they can't possibly consume it all. I hope that makes sense. And the same really applies to movies and TV shows. There are so many great shows like right now on TV or on streaming, like in general. I'm not just talking about like Marvel and Star Wars and stuff, but there are different streaming services that have all of these great shows, but it's just impossible to watch them all. And that results in you missing some of them or a lot of them. And with the MCU being so interconnected, when you just cannot find the time to watch all the MCU shows and the movies, but the shows especially, what that does is it results in people feeling like they are behind and like they can't watch the next show or movie that maybe they were looking forward to watching and setting time aside to watch because they feel like, oh, well, I can't watch it because I haven't watched the last one. And that results in even fewer viewers watching your new shows and movies, even shows and movies that maybe they want to see, but they feel like they can't because they're not caught up. So even if you find yourself in a situation where all the content you're putting out is great, and that unfortunately wasn't the case, as we'll discuss, but even if you are, if you're putting out too much of it and word of mouth can't get out about the show because people aren't watching it, that's a problem. And that brings me to really the third reason that the multiverse saga, the MCU, they're struggling right now, or at least they were. I think they really are starting to dig out of that hole. But it really comes down to it wasn't all good. The consistency that you used to expect when going into an MCU film, that unfortunately is now gone. And it used to be that when you went into an MCU movie, you knew it was going to be good. You knew that it was at least going to be a good movie, worth your time, worth your money, and that in all likelihood, it was going to be more than good. It was going to be great. But now when you go see an MCU movie, you're kind of rolling the dice and hoping that it will at least be good. And a lot of the multiverse saga, it has been very good. I myself have enjoyed most of it, but there have been too many examples of just subpar and sometimes just outright bad projects in this saga. And that has soiled the brand because when you have a brand that is putting out consistent bangers, even if they don't start putting out bad content, but just like subpar, that's like, oh, that was fine. Even that can really start to hurt a brand. And, I'll throw in a fourth reason here. The MCU, it was partially such a success because we cared so much about the characters, Tony and Steve especially, and they've been gone for this saga. So that is also going to hurt the multiverse saga when you take out the two main characters that the general audience just beloved from your continuing story. That was always going to be an obstacle in their way. And now, we're seeing RDJ is back. Chris Evans, he's a horrible liar. He's totally back. So I give you all that information, and it sounds like I'm about to predict that Avengers Doomsday will not cross the $2 billion mark and that it would be lucky to hit $1 billion. But not so fast. Not what I'm saying. Let's take a look at the numbers. So the first Avengers movie made $1.52 billion. Age of Ultron made a tiny bit less than that, coming in at $1.4 billion. Now, we can speculate on why that was. I would think that it's really just Age of Ultron didn't reach the same level of just huge pop culture phenomenon that was that first Avengers movie. So it makes sense that it made just a tiny bit less, but it pretty much made the same. It just fell a little bit short. But then came Infinity War and Endgame, which blew the original and Age of Ultron both out of the water. Infinity War made $2 billion and Endgame made $2.8 billion. That's right. The last Avengers movie to come out, Endgame, made $200 million short of $3 billion at the box office. So let's do some math and connect this with what we can expect for Avengers Doomsday. For Avengers Doomsday to come in under the $2 billion mark, it would need to make just over 28% less than Avengers Endgame. So that means Doomsday would need to have a 28% drop at the box office from Endgame in order for it not to hit the $2 billion mark. If it gets to, say, $1.9 billion, $1.99 billion, and doesn't quite cross $2 billion, that will mean that it had at least a 28% drop from Endgame. So let's see if that is something that has happened before within this franchise. Let's take a look back at the other Avengers films. So Infinity War, it made over $500 million more than its predecessor, Age of Ultron, and Endgame made nearly $800 million more than its predecessor, Infinity War. The only Avengers film to make less than its predecessor was Age of Ultron, which made only $115 million less than that first Avengers film. That's roughly an 8% drop. Again, the only Avengers movie to make less than its predecessor, to make less than the previous one, was Age of Ultron, and it was only an 8% drop. For Doomsday, this means, for Doomsday, it will have to have at least a 28% drop from its predecessor, Avengers Endgame. And I just don't see that happening. I could be wrong, but I'm not saying that Doomsday is going to make more than Endgame, but I do not see it making 28% less when you compare it to how the other films in the franchise have performed. Now, could it make more than 8% less? Could it be the biggest drop we've seen between Avengers films since Ultron and Infinity War? Sure, maybe it makes 10% less. Oh my God, if the world ends, maybe it makes 15% less. But I see no scenario where it makes 28% less. Now, I could be wrong. The MCU, it's in a rough spot right now, as is the entire movie industry, to be fair. Movies just aren't making the kind of money they used to at the box office, but No Way Home, like we said, in the midst of a pandemic, made over $1.9 billion, nearly hit that $2 billion, and Deadpool and Wolverine, an R-rated movie, made over $1.3 billion, and that was just last year. And it was a very multiverse, TVA-focused movie. No Way Home was, of course, a very multiverse-heavy movie. You have a lot of people, try to say, oh, people are tired of the multiverse of it all. I'm not so sure that's the case. And, I've also heard people make the argument, oh, well, of course, Spider-Man No Way Home and Deadpool and Wolverine made a lot of money. There's Spider-Man and Deadpool and Wolverine, and oh, geez, like Hugh Jackman and Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield were all back. It was a big deal. And yes, it was a big deal. And yes, that played a major role in why those movies made more than the others in this saga, because people are just more interested. It's more of a pop culture impact, I guess you could say, when you have these big OG characters returning with returning cast. Well, guess what? Avengers Doomsday? It's Spider-Man No Way Home and Deadpool and Wolverine smashed together and on steroids. Robert Downey Jr. is back. The original X-Men are back. It hasn't been confirmed, but I'm pretty certain Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man and of course Hugh Jackman's Wolverine and Ryan Reynolds' Deadpool, they will all be back as well. And I think Chris Evans will be back. So if we're going to compare this Avengers movie to the more recent MCU films in order to determine the box office performance that we're expecting, it's films like Deadpool and Wolverine and Spider-Man No Way Home that we should be comparing it to for reference over films like Brave New World or Quantumania that didn't perform quite as well. And yeah, Doomsday, it's a culmination event for this saga, the multiverse saga. And yes, there appears to be far less interest in the multiverse saga than in the Infinity Saga. I don't think anyone would dispute that. But this movie, Doomsday, it is also serving as a culmination event to the entire Marvel movie franchise. It is a sequel, I think, to Avengers Endgame. It's a culmination event of all of Marvel, not just the multiverse saga and not just the MCU. This movie it's a cultural event amongst the entire planet, really, that connected to the classics that predate the MCU. And everyone is going to go see this movie. And I'm just confident that it makes at least $2 billion. It makes $1 billion easy, makes $1 billion in its sleep. And I think it does cross that $2 billion mark, like Infinity War and Endgame before it. And then I think if it's great, Secret Wars, it's going to make even more than Doomsday did. Do we see finally an Avengers film hit the $3 billion mark? I don't think so. I think if any film is ever going to hit the $3 billion mark, it's probably going to be an Avatar movie. James Cameron is just, I don't know. He made a deal with somebody, a devil or something, or something. But dude has like what, 3 of the top 5 box office films of all time were directed by James Cameron. I don't know that we ever see really a $3 billion box office movie. I'd say maybe 50 years from now, when you adjust for inflation, maybe. But when you account for the decline in interest of going to the movie theaters and with the rise of streaming, I just don't know that that's ever going to happen. But that's a conversation for another time. Next, we've got a question from BobCat. BobCat asks, do you think there will be any other multiversal characters not from Earth 616 that we will see in Doomsday that haven't been confirmed? All right. Thanks so much for the question. So we know for certain a confirmed chunk of the Avengers Doomsday cast, and a big bit of that cast are the OG X-Men from the Fox X-Men universe, which makes sense because, I mean, this is the multiverse saga after all. We're going to be dealing with incursions, that's the collision of different universes, so it makes sense that we would see a lot of characters from Marvel's past show up in this movie, from even the pre-MCU days, that will appear in this movie, especially with this saga having already featured the return of Hugh Jackman as Wolverine, Tobey and Andrew Spider-Man, Wesley Snipes Blade, Jennifer Garner as Elektra. I could go on. But what's interesting about the Avengers Doomsday cast lineup, thus far anyway, is while characters like Cyclops, Mystique, Magneto, Professor X, Beast, Nightcrawler, and Gambit are all confirmed to be in Doomsday, we surprisingly have not had characters like Hugh Jackman's Wolverine announced as part of this cast. And that's where I'm going to start to answer your question is Hugh Jackman's Wolverine, the same Wolverine we met in Deadpool and Wolverine, and that is now in that X-Men universe with Deadpool. He is 110% going to be in Doomsday. One, just from a Occam's razor, common sense, what's most likely argument, it just makes sense that that character would be in this movie. Avengers Doomsday is arguably the most important MCU film ever, certainly since Endgame, certainly the most important of this saga. And with the MCU being in such an uncertain position right now, this movie, Doomsday, could arguably make or break the entire franchise. If they fuck up and deliver a subpar Avengers movie, a lot of the general audience, I'm afraid, are just going to be done. They're going to reach the conclusion that the MCU is truly just a hit or miss franchise now. And I don't know if they would ever, or at least anytime soon, be able to recover from that. But I think the same is true the other way. If Marvel is able to nail Avengers Doomsday, and it is both a critical success, a fan success, and a box office success, that will wash away, I think, any stains left behind from the not as beloved multiverse saga. And by the way, I say this as a guy, by the way, who still, I very much so love the MCU, still adore it. I've loved a lot of this saga. It's had some major missteps. It's had some pretty low points, but I don't think that they've done anything bad enough that a kick-ass Avengers movie like Doomsday will hopefully be, cannot solve. Now, I tell you all of this, why that is relevant to your question, is the fact that, okay, what they have been banking on with this saga, and I'm getting to how this connects to Wolverine and other characters coming back, is that this Avengers movie, back when it was Kang Dynasty and now that it's Doomsday, they have been banking on the audience's hunger for nostalgia, a hunger that was proven with the success of No Way Home and Deadpool and Wolverine, and even to an extent with Multiverse of Madness, and you could even say with WandaVision. Audiences have pretty much said with their pocketbook that they like the gimmick that the multiverse offers of bringing back these older and beloved characters played by the same actors that played them before. And a huge part of Doomsday's marketing is going to revolve around that. Hell, it's already revolving around that. Robert Downey Jr. is coming back to the MCU. He's the most prime example of how they are really going into this whole nostalgia thing to sell this movie. Casting Robert Downey Jr. as Doctor Doom for Doomsday, bringing him back to this franchise and not daring to do an Avengers movie without him. It is literally the MCU feeding on the nostalgia that people have for the MCU. The MCU is feeding on its own nostalgia, the nostalgia that fans have for the Infinity Saga, really. And the OG X-Men, same thing. They're another example of people who are like, oh, I remember those X-Men movies. I liked those. Oh, and they're with the Avengers now? That's what they are marketing this movie on. And I just see no scenario where they don't include Hugh Jackman's Wolverine, one of, if not the most beloved actor Marvel hero combos ever. A guy who just appeared, came back, came out of retirement from Logan, and he appeared in a multiverse saga movie that was rated R, Deadpool and Wolverine, and it still raked in over $1 billion. You put fucking Wolverine in this movie, and you plaster his face on every poster, every trailer, every backpack and lunchbox and whatever else. He will be there. Hugh Jackman's Wolverine will be there. I think it would be financially idiotic not to have him there. Also, and this is perhaps even more important, is it makes sense from a story perspective. The story calls for him to be there. The Wolverine from Deadpool and Wolverine is literally in the Fox X-Men universe right now. The same universe that Monica Rambeau landed in that post-credit scene from the Marvels, and the same X-Men universe that we will be seeing in Doomsday. It will be weird, I think, if you show that universe and you show those X-Men and they have such a crucial role in Doomsday and Wolverine doesn't show up. I also want to say that I think that with Wolverine, who will totally be there, will come his daughter Laura, aka X-23, a character that I think when the MCU resets and we see like a little bit of a semi-reboot, I think that they should have her be part of this new X-Men lineup, but that's a video for another time. Now, as far as X-23 and Wolverine go, I think we could see X-23 and Wolverine living at the X-Mansion right now in Doomsday. They don't have a home in this universe. They're mutants, so it's just the obvious place that they would go and that they would be taken in to join this team of X-Men. Now, that does get a little complicated with the timelines and all that. The X-Men universe, it has several variant timelines, and without getting too into the weeds on it, there really should be two Wolverines in this timeline right now, because in Deadpool and Wolverine, they go back to Wade's universe before the events of Logan, so there should still be a Logan there, but God, it's already making my head hurt to talk about it, and I'm getting kind of frustrated. So I think they're just going to go the simple route of saying, hey, this is Deadpool's timeline, his little corner, his little X-Men universe thing here. That's a little wonky and off kilter, but for the most part, it's got all the stuff you love in it. Deadpool himself, has referenced that the timelines can be confusing. You can do one little fourth wall break reference from Deadpool that just kind of clears up the whole thing. Like, he could even say, shouldn't there be another Wolverine? And they're like, huh? And just blow past it. So anyway, I think Laura's there. I think Wolverine's there. I think Deadpool is there. We know Gambit is going to be there, played by Channing Tatum. So he's coming from Deadpool and Wolverine into this movie. And I've also been pretty outspoken that I think that Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man is totally in this movie, to finally move on to another character outside of the Wolverine pocket there, to answer your question. Now, as for other characters beyond them, others that come to mind are Blade and Elektra, who were also part of Deadpool and Wolverine. But in short, as I've rambled, I think that there are still a lot of characters that will be in Doomsday that have yet to be announced. I think there will be some surprises that will be saved for the movie in terms of certain characters popping up that they won't announce the casting for, such as a Ben Affleck quick Daredevil appearance. I would lose my fucking mind. Have Jon Favreau come in as not Happy Hogan, but Foggy Nelson. Yes, he played Foggy Nelson in that Daredevil movie. I really think in a lot of ways, we might learn that this X-Men universe, Deadpool universe, whatever, this other Marvel universe that we see in Doomsday, I think in a lot of ways it's going to serve as like this culmination, Mod Podge, like just world that pretty much represents the idea of another MCU, like this alternate Marvel universe that general audiences understand consists of bits and pieces of all of those old pre-MCU Marvel movies. So it could also have like not only the X-Men and the characters I've mentioned thus far, but it could have the Tim Story Fantastic Four, Nick Cage Ghost Rider, Thomas Hayden Church Punisher. They could go all out, and that would be awesome. But we also have to remember that we do have Secret Wars coming as well. So I'm sure that they want to save some of their load for that movie. Jesus, gross. Sorry. I apologize. But yeah, there's some characters that I think will show up in Doomsday from other universes that have appeared in previous films that like predate the MCU or that were releasing, alongside the MCU or whatever. All right. Thanks so much for the question. Let's move on to our next one. This one comes to us from Yudha. Who do you think RDJ is playing in the next Avengers movie? Is he a Victor Von Doom who has Tony Stark's face? Or is he a Tony Stark who became Doctor Doom like Star-Lord T'Challa? Which one do you think is the better route or direction? Thank you. All right, my guy. I have talked about this a lot, but I love the way you asked the question, tying it to the What If episode where T'Challa becomes Star-Lord. So I have to give this question some love. And I thought I would take the opportunity to clarify my position as well and talk about the other possibilities of exactly who Robert Downey Jr. is playing in this movie. Dr. Victor Von Doom, bad Tony Stark, who is called Dr. Doom, both. Let's break it down. So, what I really love about your question is your example of a T'Challa who became Star-Lord. That is such a good example of how this version of Doctor Doom from Doomsday how he could be Tony Stark and not actually have any connection to Victor Von Doom. That would mean no Tony Stark was born a Von Doom but was adopted by the Starks. No, he was born Tony Stark but then adopted by the Von Dooms. Just straight up Tony Stark, who takes a certain path that leads to him becoming the villain, Doctor Doom, taking on that moniker without actually being Victor Von Doom. That's not a theory that I have really been promoting. I'm a big fan of the adoption theory, as we'll discuss. But that is totally a way that they could do it and make it work. Because in What If, we saw a scenario where instead of a younger Peter Quill being abducted by Yondu instead nabbed T'Challa. And instead of T'Challa, living his life in Wakanda and becoming the Black Panther, we see him go on to live a life in space where he becomes Star-Lord. And funnily enough, Peter Quill was set on a path to work at Dairy Queen. I love Dairy Queen. I kind of want Dairy Queen now. Anyway, so it really could be that simple with Tony and Doom. We could have the same scenario where we had T'Challa be Star-Lord instead of Peter Quill. And that doesn't mean that T'Challa and Peter Quill are variants because they were both Star-Lord. Of course not, because we're not talking about them as beings. We're talking about hero and villain monikers, just like multiple people who've been Spider-Man or Batman, but that doesn't mean that they're all variants with Peter Parker or Bruce Wayne. So with Doom, it could simply be that this is a reality where Tony Stark is the guy that became Doctor Doom. Now, the one hiccup to that is that the Russo brothers, the directors of the film, they have said when they announced that RDJ was playing the character, they said that he is playing Victor Von Doom. So that would essentially be the equivalent of, instead of saying Chris Pratt or the late Chadwick Boseman, I forget who voiced, did he get to voice? I'm wondering if he got to voice in What If. I can't remember. Anyway, it'd be different from saying like they're playing Black Panther or Star-Lord or they're playing Peter Quill or T'Challa. They didn't just say that RDJ is playing Doctor Doom. They said he is playing Victor Von Doom. And that's why I've always been so certain that one, yes, he is playing Victor Von Doom, not just, a Tony Stark that became Doctor Doom, became a bad guy, but also two, that there's no way in hell that they cast RDJ to play Victor Von Doom and just ignore that he looks like Tony Stark. Just ignore that this would mean that Victor Von Doom and Tony Stark have a multiversal connection. And real quick, sidetrack, I've never understood this argument where when I was saying that, yes, Victor Von Doom, the guy that RDJ is playing, will be a variant of or with Tony Stark, meaning that Tony Stark could be a Victor Von Doom variant. You know, semantics, whichever. They're variants of one another. And when I would say that, people would say to me, no, the Russo brothers said he is playing Victor Von Doom. Yeah, exactly. They can be multiversal variants of one another and have been given different names at birth, or if, you know, if one was adopted or something. That you're just proving my point. So anyway, my theory, and many others have come up with this theory as well, is that in the mainline MCU, perhaps the guy we know as Tony Stark, he really was born Victor Von Doom and was adopted by the Starks, and Howard Stark probably experimented on him. We heard him say, "You're my greatest creation," so maybe there was, you know, something more to that, and made him, his adoptive son, more like him because he knew he was adopted, because he adopted him, and he wants him to be more like him. So maybe he experimented on him, and that's why he is so different and acts like the guy that we know as Tony Stark. And that could also be why there is this like tension between those two characters as he got older, which is perfectly normal for a father and son who are a lot alike to have those tensions. But also it could be because he was really never his son. So I think that was a cool way. There is a cool way that they can do it. I think by doing that, by having them be multiversally connected, that falls in line with the whole shtick or theme or whatever you want to call it that they have been setting up for this multiverse saga. They've hit us over the head with the multiverse and variants and how all of that works. So it just makes sense that in a scenario where they bring RDJ back to play the main villain, where he previously played the main hero, and it's in a saga and a movie all about the multiverse, then it's just the most obvious answer that they're variants of one another. That's what the entire saga has been setting up. Now, if the Russos hadn't said that RDJ is specifically playing Victor Von Doom, then I would totally be on board with the possibility that we are just seeing a variant of Tony Stark that becomes Doctor Doom, which is something we've seen in the comics. And maybe it's a variant of Tony Stark that survived the snap, kept the Infinity Stones, and became this power-hungry, scarred guy who now goes by the name Doctor Doom, or maybe people started calling him Doctor Doom. And because of like the multiverse and how, you know, different things can happen but that are similar between universes, and maybe it's like a constant in the multiverse that there are different people who ascend to this like this role of Doctor Doom. So we could see Tony Stark become this guy that, you know, has the same scars and the same green hood and the same, you know, like a similar armor. And it's just a constant of the vastness of the multiverse that sometimes Tony Stark is the guy that becomes this idea of who we understand to be Doctor Doom. And then hell, maybe we could learn that it was this Tony Stark Doctor Doom, kind of like Joaquin Phoenix's Joker, that inspired the Joker that would go on to fight Batman in the future, and this inspired the separate guy who, you know, called himself Joker that killed Bruce Wayne's parents. Maybe it's a similar thing here where it's the Tony Stark who is Doctor Doom and has that moniker of Doctor Doom that actually inspires the real Victor Von Doom to take up that moniker in the future and become Doctor Doom. It gets a little coincidental there. This guy named Victor Von Doom is going to pick up the mantle of this completely separate guy whose name happens to also have the word Doom in it. Maybe they could change that by having his name be Victor Von something else, but then everybody will cry about that. So, maybe they shouldn't do that. So that's a possible scenario. I guess it's still a possible scenario, but it would more so be a possible scenario had they not said he is playing Victor Von Doom, which they did. Now, a scenario that's not going to happen is a scenario where they don't acknowledge that Doctor Doom and RDJ look alike. 0% chance that happens, especially in the multiverse saga that has hit us over the head with the concept of variants. Another one that is really unlikely to happen is that it's just a coincidence that this guy who's Doctor Doom happens to look like Tony Stark. People who like to disagree with anything that comes out of my mouth tend to use the Chris Evans as Steve Rogers and Human Torch argument example, and how Deadpool noticed that Steve Rogers and Johnny Storm from the Tim Story Fantastic Four movies are played by the same guy. Does that mean that Human Torch or Human Torch and Captain America are variants? No, of course not. It was a fucking gag for a fucking Deadpool movie. It's not that serious. So I don't think that should really have any bearing on our theories here. I mean, sure, yes, it can have some bearing, but I think you do have to acknowledge that was a joke, and that they're not going to copy paste that same joke onto, oh, golly shucks, gee, he sure does look like Tony. That's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. It's going to have a pivotal part of the story that they look alike. Now, well, I don't think they're going to do this, but if they did go the route of it being a coincidence that Doom and Tony look alike, that would still be with the caveat of us seeing Doom realize, like, oh, holy shit, multiverse, I look like these people's hero. Let me use that to my advantage. Don't get me wrong, I do think that is going to happen. I totally think Doom is going to use the fact that he and Tony look alike to his advantage to dupe heroes into trusting him and his vision for how to save the multiverse, and that could use the fact that these same heroes view Loki as having been, a villain. And that could also play a role in them making, like, making certain characters decide, well, we're going to join the Tony Stark looking dude, not the Loki dude. But even when they do that, which I think they will, it won't be a scenario where Doom is like surprised to learn, hey, I happen to look like this Tony guy. No, that's not going to happen. I think the fact that he and Tony are multiversally entangled will be a big part of the story, not just an exploited like gimmick. It's going to have something a little deeper than that attached to it. Thank you so much for that question. I hope I answered it. I've talked about that so much. I try not to repeat myself, but I just inevitably do. So before we move on to our next question, I thought we would watch and then break down this interview with Kelsey Grammer and his return to playing Hank McCoy's Beast in Avengers Doomsday, and his confirmation that he shares a scene with all the X-Men, Thor, Reed Richards, and Doctor Doom. Let's give it a watch, and then we'll talk about it on the other side.
I can't sit here with you and not ask you a couple questions about Avengers Doomsday.
Okay.
Everyone is so excited to have you back. What was it like getting to reunite on screen with your X-Men co-stars once again?
Well, what's fun is, I mean, in the old one, I worked with you quite a bit, and with Hallie, and then some with Patrick. It was so fun when Patrick did Frasier. He was hysterical.
Yeah.
But that was kind of it. In this one, we really actually did work quite a bit with one another, and I don't know how much I'm allowed to talk about, but it was fun to interact with people I hadn't acted with before. I love the character so much. Always wanted to do him again. I want to do him again now. I mean,
You're not done.
I hope not. He's just wonderful.
Who were you most geeked out to meet, to interact with from
well,
the cast?
Thor and
A little Chris Hemsworth
those
action?
guys.
Yes.
I'm a big fan of Robert Downey Jr. I love him, and he's just a terrific fella.
You get to share a scene?
Well, it's sort of sharing a scene. I don't want to go too far.
He's trying to not get
I don't know
fired.
what I'm supposed to say or not say. With the new guy from Fantastic Four. Pedro, yeah, Pedro.
Pedro Pascal.
Thanks, Pedro, wonderful guy. I mean, I really, really enjoyed hanging out with him, and we worked together.
You worked together. You shared a scene.
James Marsden.
Yeah,
We'd
great guy.
never really worked together. By the time I was in, he had been dissolved into just his glasses floating in the air, and I was like, so it was nice to see him alive.
So, guys, I grew up on Frasier, if you couldn't tell, and I just absolutely adore Kelsey Grammer. I remember seeing X-Men The Last Stand at a very difficult time in my life. I want to say I was like 8, and my parents, they had just separated and were about to get divorced, and my mom took me to see X-Men The Last Stand. And I mean, at the time, of course, an 8-year-old boy, I loved it. I also, of course, loved Spider-Man 3 when I was a kid. We all did. And going back to X-Men Last Stand, I really loved Kelsey Grammer's interpretation of Beast. And I remember years after that seeing Days of Future Past. And when he popped up for that brief moment, Kelsey Grammer as Beast in that new future, that was so cool. It was awesome. And while I, as someone who did enjoy the Marvels, I'm not like casting shade on that movie. I don't think it was by any means perfect, but I thought it was a, perfectly just fine a good movie. Good. It wasn't great. It was good. Anyway, I would still say that I think my favorite part of that movie was the post-credit scene with Kelsey Grammer back as Beast. But in like this full-fledged CGI, version of the character, giving him a more comic accurate appearance, but still looking and sounding like Kelsey Grammer. And, watching Grammer in this video geek out about getting to be in this movie and wanting to do it again, and him being so excited to be involved, it has me even more excited that he is involved. And I loved hearing him talk about getting to, have scenes with the other X-Men that he didn't get to have like scenes with or act opposite of in Last Stand, like James Marsden Cyclops. He name dropped Thor as a new guy that he's getting to work with as well. And Reed Richards, Pedro Pascal. The Reed Richards one, that wasn't as much of a surprise as the Thor one was, because Nightcrawler actor Alan Cummings, he kind of already spilled the beans on that one. Basically, he confirmed that we are going to see Reed Richards interact with the X-Men because he has a scene where he's punching Pedro Pascal. Now, the Thor one, though, that's fun, because I assumed that we would see like the Fantastic Four and like the Earth-based Avengers like travel to the X-Men universe, perhaps pursuing Doom and Franklin, but then somehow, Thor is also in the mix, but like elsewhere, like not a part of that thing. Like in Infinity War and Endgame, we have the different teams doing different things. And we know from a set picture, spoiler warning, if you don't want to know anything, this was a picture shared by Chris Hemsworth's stunt double. So ready? Okay. We have seen from a set image that the Thing, Falcon, John Walker, and Thor, they share a scene at the TVA in the room right outside where the temporal loom once resided and where Loki was last seen before taking his throne. So they're going to Loki. And maybe that is at the end of the movie. And maybe the third act of the film brings all of those heroes together as they are pursuing Doom. In fact, I think that's it. I think Thor and perhaps a team of Avengers and the Thing, maybe all the heroes converge on Earth 616 to meet and talk, and then they divvy up and they go on their things. And Thor, just like he did in Infinity War, goes on his separate mission where he went to make Stormbreaker. He and like Falcon and John Walker and the Thing, they could say, okay, we need to go get to Loki. And maybe that's where, maybe Shang-Chi is with them. Maybe that's where the beacon within the 10 rings is leading to. I mean, it sure does look like it. And then Reed and some of the other Avengers, they could say, okay, you go do that, and we're going to go to the X-Men universe to get Franklin. So they're chasing Franklin and Doom, who probably also has Sue. And then that is where we could see like a fight go down in the X-Men universe, and like the Avengers and Reed and maybe Johnny and some of the X-Men, including Beast. They end up chasing Doctor Doom, who is now leaving the X-Men universe and is on his way to dethrone Loki. So maybe they're chasing him, and that's where all of these paths and different storylines throughout the film then converge, and we'll see like Doom versus everyone. Like he gets to Loki at the same time as Thor and the gang, and Doom is being chased by X-Men and the other Avengers and Reed, and then they're all there and they all fight Doom. So maybe they're like trying to protect Loki, but ultimately Doom wins and takes the throne. That would be awesome. But I'm saying that's the third act. Maybe that could also just be the second act of the film, and God knows what happens in the third act. And I think I forgot to mention, it was in the video, Grammer said that he shares the scene with RDJ, but he had like this little bit of a caveat. I'll play the clip.
I'm a big fan of Robert Downey Jr. I love him, and he's just a terrific fella.
You get to share a scene?
Well, it's sort of sharing a scene. I don't want to go too far.
This kind of implies that maybe he knows that he has a scene with Doom, but that they weren't actually on set at the same time, which is very common with giant movies like this one and the giant cast of big stars, and having to work around all their schedules. So It's just very exciting. I thought I would share this clip with you guys because I thought it was so cool, and I was smiling the whole way through it, so I thought I would share that with you. All right, let's move on to our next question. And thank you so much for that question. All right, our next question comes to us from Taylor. Do you think Daniel RPK is right about Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man being in Avengers Doomsday instead of Tom Holland? All right, thanks so much for the question. So let's talk about what Tobey Maguire's role in Avengers Doomsday is going to look like. And I also want to go over some recent reports that suggest he might actually have the black suit in Doomsday or an Iron Spider suit, perhaps one provided to him by Doctor Doom. So let's get into it. So there are some new reports from relatively reliable MCU leaker Daniel RPK that Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man is in Avengers Doomsday, to which you guys who've been following me for a while know I'm going to file under the duh column. I did a video like a month ago saying that I thought Tobey would be the Spider-Man of Doomsday. Now, that was in the midst of a conversation surrounding another leak about Tom Holland, which might have also come from Daniel RPK, I can't remember, about Tom Holland not being in Avengers Doomsday. And some took that to mean that Spider-Man wouldn't be in Avengers Doomsday. Guys, there is a 0% chance, okay, that Spider-Man isn't in Avengers Doomsday. Maybe Tom Holland's Spider-Man isn't in Avengers Doomsday, but I think Tom Holland's Spider-Man is in it. We can talk about that in a second. But there has always been a 0% chance that just the character of Spider-Man was not going to be in this movie and have a pretty prominent role. Because, like I've said already, this movie, Avengers Doomsday, it's the most important MCU movie of all time. And there is not a snowball's chance in hell that Marvel wouldn't take advantage of the fact that they have the ability to use their most popular character, Spider-Man, in this movie. They have a deal with Sony that permits them to use this character, and you can be damn well certain that they are going to. Now, as far as Tobey Spider-Man, yeah, that makes sense that he would be the one. This is a multiverse saga culmination event movie. Tobey was in the multiverse saga's, I think, biggest movie, box office-wise, Spider-Man No Way Home. There is an actual story reason for Tobey Spider-Man to be there. And I've heard some people say, no, Spider-Man No Way Home, that was it for Tobey and Andrew. They're done. That was their swan song. I said the same thing for Hugh, too, which is just horseshit. I guarantee you, when they were approached, Tobey Maguire, Andrew Garfield, and Hugh Jackman, when they were approached about being in No Way Home and Deadpool and Wolverine, they were also approached with being in these Avengers movies. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if they signed those contracts then as well. These movies, Doomsday and Secret Wars, they are a culmination event for not just the MCU, but the last quarter century plus of Marvel movies. Robert Downey Jr. is back. The original Fox era X-Men are back for Doomsday. Both of those, I'm referring to Doomsday. And, of course, Hugh, Andrew, and Tobey, they're going to be part of it as well. They've already been part of it. They will continue to be a part of it. Whether that be Doomsday or maybe some of them not showing up until Secret Wars. I think Andrew could be one that doesn't show up until Secret Wars. But I do think Hugh's in Doomsday. I think Tobey is probably in Doomsday. Now, specifically, talking about Tobey, Tobey Spider-Man, you guys know, he's my favorite. He's my first. He was my first. His Spider-Man movie was my first movie theater experience when I was like 4 years old. My mom took me to see that first Sam Raimi Spider-Man movie. And I don't know, man, I think it kind of set me on my path, like the first Star Wars film did for a lot of people, a lot of filmmakers, a lot of people in the space. And I love Raimi, I love Tobey, and hey, Raimi's back, by the way, too. Raimi has been brought back. So not only are they bringing actors from Marvel's past back in this multiverse saga, they're doing the same thing with directors. So while the whole like nostalgia and multiverse thing may be getting a little stale, we still have a saga to complete here, a saga to finish, and we deserve the big payoff that has been promised, which is to see the original X-Men, the original Spider-Man, fighting alongside Hugh Jackman's Wolverine and the Avengers and fighting fucking Doctor Doom, who, is being played by Robert Downey Jr. This is the movie I have dreamt of since I was like 8 years old. And while the interconnectivity of the MCU did certainly scratch that itch of having an interconnected Marvel universe and seeing our different heroes in their movies then cross over with each other in culmination movies, that has never really included the original X-Men and the OG Spider-Man. I mean, it has now with Tobey being brought into No Way Home, and we saw Patrick Stewart's Xavier and Multiverse of Madness, but we have really yet to get to see that crossover with the OG Spider-Man, the OG X-Men included in these films. And Doomsday is our opportunity, Secret Wars as well, to finally get that. You know, I remember as a kid daydreaming, and this was pre-MCU, about the idea of having a movie that had Hugh Jackman's Wolverine, Church's Punisher, Maguire's Spider-Man, Nick Cage's Ghost Rider, Affleck's Daredevil, the OG Fantastic Four, Ang Lee Hulk. And for those of you who are old enough to remember this, like in the days of early YouTube, do you remember those fan edit videos that were like trailers for like Ultimate Alliance, fan trailers for like an Ultimate Alliance movie, and they would put all the like snippets from the different Marvel movies into one, and those are always so cool. And I remember as a kid, I was a child, being like, is this real? And then I'm like, oh wait, no, that was taken from this movie, and you know, you learn. But it was still cool, and now we're getting that with Doomsday and Secret Wars. We're getting like that actual movie is finally happening. Now, as far as what I think Tobey's role will be in Doomsday, I don't think Tobey ever made it back to his universe when he was supposed to be sent back to his universe at the end of Spider-Man No Way Home. Remember, after the events of Avengers Endgame, the multiverse essentially obtained free will, which allowed for incursions, universes to collide. And Peter's wish, Tom Holland's Peter's wish, that brought Tobey Spider-Man, not on purpose, but into the MCU, that very likely broke a barrier, broke a barrier point between universes, 616 and Tobey's universe, and that could have resulted in Tobey's universe being destroyed via incursion, or Tobey's involvement and being absent from his universe and over into another. That could have made him a target of a Doctor Doom in the shadows, since the events of Endgame and Loki like taking the throne, which all happened in that, you know, the way that time would work is the second Loki left that splintering point in Endgame during the time heist, all of that unfolded at the same time. So by the end of Endgame, Loki was already on the throne, is pretty much the theory. So there could, since that moment, have been a Doctor Doom out there in the multiverse that is now sprawling, and the 616 universe is joining the multiverse. And he could be trying to fix things the way he sees fit. And he could have been the one that saw this incursion happening between Tobey's universe and the 616 universe, and perhaps Andrew's universe as well, and all of that. And we saw the sky cracking and all that. That could have been like the visual of the incursion. And Doom could have stepped in and been like, oh shit, I got to destroy one of these universes or they're both going to die. And he could have just destroyed Tobey's universe and saved the mainline MCU universe, Universe 616. We'll just have to see. But I do love the idea of learning that perhaps through just a quick expositional line from Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man, that when he was supposed to have been sent back home, he just landed in a universe that was dead. And like, you know, kind of like the universe that we saw in Multiverse of Madness that was dead, and things were just kind of floating, and it was dying, and we saw, you know, the cars floating by and all that. That could be what Tobey landed in. Or if there was no universe for Tobey to be sent home to because it was destroyed, where would he land? The Void. And who's in the Void? The group of ragtags from Deadpool and Wolverine, like the people from Marvel's past, like Snipes' Blade and Elektra, and the Void is really where I think that Loki is going to end up if Doom yeets him off the throne. That could be where we see Loki meet Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man and like form his own team of variants, like with Blade and Elektra. And remember, Infinity War and Endgame, they divided up the cast into teams. And I think the same will be true in Doomsday. I think having Tobey and these other characters there, perhaps, in a team of variants that Loki is forming, it won't feel like a gimmick. It's going to feel like a yes, this happened, therefore this happened, type of storytelling, not just, oh, and then. There's actually a reason for them to be there, and it actually interconnects and builds upon what has come before it. We love and care about this variant, the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man. We care about his world, and we will feel emotionally invested and connected to his mission to get back his world, get back MJ, get back perhaps his kid, instead of just giving us some random variant whose history we know nothing about and don't really feel a connection to, despite them, they happen to share the face of the same actor. Kind of like the Patrick Stewart Professor X, which, yes, we felt a bond to, but he really wasn't a Professor X that we knew. He was very similar to him, but he wasn't the one. With Tobey, he is playing the Spider-Man from the Raimi films and from No Way Home. And he's just a beloved and cared about character, just as beloved and cared about as Hugh's Wolverine, Chris Evans' Cap. And I can see him being a huge player in this film, and I think that's a good thing. I think it helps sell this movie. It gets people excited. It's going to be great. Now, as for Tom Holland's Spider-Man, I do think Tom Holland shows up in Doomsday, but maybe his appearance is more of a cameo type of appearance, like toward the end of the film. And Tobey's Spider-Man is like the main Spider-Man of that movie, like one of the lead characters in the film. In fact, I could see with Tobey being such a universally beloved Spider-Man that spans generations, he could be great fodder opportunity for Doctor Doom come the end of Avengers Doomsday. He could be a great choice of hero to have die at the hands of Doctor Doom and really make us hate Doom and feel a huge emotional impact, and then still get to have Spider-Man be in Secret Wars because we have Andrew and Tom. And then Andrew and Tom, they could be like on a mission to avenge their brother, their fellow Spider-Man, come Secret Wars. And they could be on a mission to like fulfill Tobey's mission of saving his universe. And it would be better, I think, if they just kept Tobey dead and had that sacrifice that he made to fighting against Doom in hopes of saving his universe, and then having Tom and Andrew maybe go and tell MJ and Tobey's family, like, hey, you're back, and he fought like hell to make it possible for you to be back, but he lost his life, but we know he loved you, blah, blah, blah. And you could have that emotional scene, and you could have Tobey's death at the hands of Doom be that final bow. But you also aren't going to catch me complaining if whenever the reset happens, they do bring him back, or just decide, we're not going to kill him off at all, and have like a Tobey Maguire Spider-Man in a Spider-Man 4 directed by Sam Raimi, and have that movie serve as like an Elseworld story post Secret Wars. And what this could also do for Sony, whether they do a Spider-Man 4 with Tobey or kill him off in Doomsday and don't bring him back, either way, they could do like another Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy, but with like a Spider-Girl and have Sadie Sink, who is in Spider-Man Brand New Day and who has been confirmed to be in Secret Wars. Maybe she's playing Tobey Maguire's daughter and playing his successor as Spider-Man. You could do a trilogy of Spider films with Tobey's Spider-Man's daughter being Spider-Woman now in that same Sam Raimi universe, where her dad was once this beloved and now sacrificial Spider-Man who maybe they all know like saved their entire reality. And you can bring back Kirsten Dunst, who could then serve in like an Aunt May style role, while Tobey in Death serves as like this Uncle Ben dead father type role, who is her moral compass. You could even have him do some cameos, like in her mind, like we saw Uncle Ben do throughout those Raimi films. So that would all be really cool. And I realize I'm kind of droning on, but I do want to talk about one more thing. There was a report that for Avengers Doomsday, Tobey, while filming, was wearing a full CGI suit. Now, we've seen this done before with Spider-Man, specifically in Avengers Infinity War and Endgame, where Tom Holland's Iron Spider suit was a fully mocap suit. But geez, they just made a suit for Tobey for No Way Home that's identical to his suit from his Raimi trilogy. And I just love that suit. And I'm hoping that we see it back again. Now, there's the possibility that with Doomsday being this giant production with a shit ton of stuff to juggle, a giant cast, a crazy shooting schedule, it may have been easier from a production standpoint to just put Tobey in a mocap suit and add the suit in later. And it could still be his traditional suit. But Jesus, I would hope that they would take the time to put him in an actual, like, physical suit. I know those types of suits have to be fitted, and they can be clumsy, and they constantly have to be adjusted as you film. But I would think it's worth it because you can usually tell if it's a CGI suit or an actual practical suit. Now, another reason that it could be CGI could be like the black suit, but I really don't think we're going to see Bully Maguire back again. No black suit Tobey. I do, however, think we may see black suit Tom Holland Spider-Man, perhaps in Brand New Day and definitely in Secret Wars. I did a video about that over on Screen Crush if you want to check that out, talking about how Venom is the secret villain of Brand New Day. But as far as like perhaps an Iron Spider suit being on Tobey, maybe let Tobey level up for his fight against Dr. Doom, him going to fight in space. Perhaps it's an iron suit that is provided by Dr. Doom the same way Tom Holland's Spider-Man suit was provided by Tony Stark, but that would mean that Tobey is like on the side of Dr. Doom, and I'm not so sure I like the idea of Tobey Spider-Man being on Team Doom, even if he's well-intentioned. You could make it work. Like if he is desperate to get his universe back and sees, working with Doom as the only way to do it, but I really don't want Tobey on what we as the audience know as the bad guy team. I think there'd be something cooler to seeing like Tobey Spider-Man fight RDJ's Doom, but hey, we could get both. He could be Team Doom for a little bit, and then he betrays Doom when he realizes he's no good. Another option is Tobey could be on Team Loki from the jump, and maybe Loki gave him like an enchanted suit or something. The possibilities are endless, and the more I talk about this movie, the more excited I get for it. It's going to be so much fun, and, well, I hope. But hey, let me know. I've talked long enough. Do you guys think that Tobey is in Spider-Man, or Tobey Spider-Man is in Avengers Doomsday? And let me know down in the comments below. And do you think that he's going to be in his traditional suit, maybe an Iron Spider suit, maybe the black suit? Let me know. All right. Let's move on to our next question. Our next question comes to us from Drake. Drake asks, Colton, I liked your video breaking down the Superman box office numbers, thank you, and why the Forbes article and claiming it lost money was wrong. Did you see Forbes basically retracted their claims that the movie failed and that they are now saying it was an even bigger success than you had said? Yeah. So talk about a backtrack. Forbes, a once reliable outlet, but over the past year or so, not so much. They reported back in like October that Superman lost money. And they shared in an article this formula they used to come to that conclusion. And it was wrong. The math was wrong, which resulted in this inaccurate assertion that the movie lost money at the box office. Now, I did a breakdown of the Superman box office and debunked the Forbes article, essentially. I did that a few weeks ago, as did many others. And it would appear now that Forbes is backtracking as well, albeit it's a different contributor this time. It's not from the guy that wrote the first article. But guys, what stinks about this, like, not stinks as in, oh, that's too bad, stinks as in, like, you're not running your operation very well, Forbes, is that original article and this new article, these aren't opinion pieces. This isn't two different contributors from Forbes having different opinions and writing articles about their opinion, which would be totally fine. These are pieces that are breaking down data. It's not just that, two Forbes contributors have a different opinion on whether or not Superman was a success. We're talking cold hard numbers. And the previous report was just factually false. And as far as I know, they have not printed a retraction. Instead, they've just allowed another article to go up that basically pretends that first article never happened. And now, in that article, really, they even had the nerve to, well, I don't know if this guy that wrote this was having fun and taking shots at the other guy or what, but it is a Forbes article. And they had the nerve to call out other, like, quote, haters for their reports that Superman lost money. Motherfuckers, you, Forbes, are the ones who, one of the main outlets that reported that Superman lost money and gave, like, actually gave that false claim a sense of validity. And now the Snyder Bros, who hate everything James Gunn and DCU, these douchebags are running victory laps following your report because you gave this false sense of validity to their baseless claims that James Gunn and the DCU and his Superman are all somehow massive failures. And real quick, it's rich, isn't it, with the Snyder Bros, that anytime a report from one of these big trades like Forbes comes out that these dorks don't like, they call it fake news and wrong. But when they put out a report that confirms their own, previously held bias, they say shit like, well, you can't doubt Forbes, it's Forbes. And now here Forbes is saying the opposite, and these guys are either silent or coping or whatever. So look, let's just read the report, all right? And then we'll move on to more fun topics, I promise. But I just had to give this a little bit of attention and take my own little victory lap, because Forbes, who had said Superman failed, they're now calling it an even bigger financial success than I did in my breakdown of the box office. So let's read it together, and then I promise we'll move on. All right, starting the article now. There's a lot of mistaken analysis out there about Gunn, the DCU, and Superman. Some websites, mostly on low-quality fan sites that push rumors and clickbait, you mean you, they're trying to spin things as if Superman is some sort of box office failure and that audiences aren't interested. The film generated more than $100 million in profits, had great reviews and audience scores, and did big numbers in theaters and home entertainment. But you can safely ignore it. And anyone pushing those false narratives. What's actually happening is very simple. WBD is Warner Brothers Discovery. They're up for a buyout. And some fans want certain studios to buy it and fire Gunn to reinstall whatever personal preferences those fans have about DC movie. That's true. They think that if Netflix buys it or Skydance buys it, that they're going to bring back the Snyderverse. And also, I just want to say, to those saying that, oh, if the DCU was successful, they wouldn't be trying to sell Warner Brothers, and get rid of it all. No, the reason they're selling Warner Brothers, the reason DC is so successful right now, is Zaslav. Zaslav came in, they bought Warner Brothers from AT&T, Discovery did, for the sole purpose of creating Warner Brothers Discovery for making it a profitable company that could sell for a lot of money. They were doing a flip. That's the whole reason they bought it in the first place, was to sell it. That's why they did away with the DCU. That's why they brought in a talented guy like James Gunn to save the DCU and actually make it worth wanting and making the value of the company more so that they could then sell it. I'll continue with the article. The theory is that studios will see fans acting mad and hear fan blogs claiming Superman was a failure, and that somehow those studio executives will be generally ignorant enough of how movies and box office and profits work to fall for it. Hint, they aren't. Dude, you're being really cocky for a site. And I agree with everything you're saying, but for a site that just put out an article that said all this stuff that you're critiquing. Any changes a buyer wanted to implement would likely fall within a narrow range, but I think the primary DCU plans will remain as is. Gunn's Superman is the most popular superhero film of 2025. I said that. And it sounds like this guy might have watched my video, actually. And it reset the audience interest in DC with a box office result at least 40% or more higher than any other previous of the 9 DCU movies from the past 8 years. It beat all 3 Marvel Studios releases this year, including Marvel's summer tentpole Fantastic Four First Steps. Superman also earned universal critical acclaim and high audience scores, as well as strong streaming numbers and home entertainment sales and rentals. The film will have generated significantly more than $100 million in profits and approaching a $150 million globally when all is said and done. This year, it's not a failure. It didn't underperform. It was widely beloved and by mainstream audiences and most fans, and no amount of resentment or wishes or lies will change those facts. I agree. Sounds like you watched my video. But again, it's rich coming from Forbes. So, good on this writer, but still, fuck you, Forbes. I remember that you guys spoiled Infinity War for me years ago. Before the movie was publicly released, you're talking about how the snap happens. All right. Let's move on to our next question, and I believe this is our final question. Save the best for last, because this is from channel member Eokanev2. I am so sorry, asks, and by the way, thank you for being a channel member, which guarantees your question to be read and answered right here on the show and makes it possible for me to be able to keep doing the show. So thank you so much. They ask, do you think there is any chance of getting Danny Ketch Ghost Rider, or is it always going to be Johnny Blaze? Because my favorite Ghost Rider era was Ketch Rider and Hellfire Shotgun Johnny. Okay. Ghost Rider is a badass character, and it's a shame that we haven't had more of him in the MCU. And it's a shame that despite my affection for those Nick Cage Ghost Rider movies, that the character still has really yet to get like a truly great adaptation, like something like Logan-esque. I am hoping that with Marvel Studios now having the full rights to the character of Ghost Rider, that we will see him integrated into whatever story they're telling, like with Mephisto and hopefully a Midnight Suns show or movie. Now, the MCU does already kind of have a Ghost Rider, and it's Robbie Reyes from Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., and he got the Spirit of Vengeance, I think, from Johnny Blaze in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Now, after Secret Wars, they could just change all of that. They could just do a reset and do pretty much whatever they want. My preference, I think, will always be Johnny Blaze. I mentioned earlier in the show that I also hope that they bring back Nick Cage, Johnny Blaze as Ghost Rider for Doomsday and Secret Wars, or at least Secret Wars. I think that would be awesome. But post Secret Wars, I think we totally do get a Ghost Rider something. And I would think they would probably go with Johnny Blaze, but they could go the Danny Ketch route. I don't know that they do. I think in the comics, he was like the third guy to get the Spirit of Vengeance. He is like a lesser known Ghost Rider. But that doesn't mean anything. I mean, he's still Ghost Rider. It's not like as in, like pivotal as having like Bruce Wayne be Batman. But they could also do something like what we're seeing DC do with Lanterns and have like where they're having like an OG like Hal Jordan Green Lantern serve as a mentor to the younger John Stewart Green Lantern. And we know Guy Gardner is in there as well. So we could see like all three Ghost Riders working together. Johnny Blaze like as a mentoring figure to a like a pupil of Reyes, or bring in Ketch. That would be awesome. Hell, get Nick Cage back to be the Johnny Blaze like older mentor Ghost Rider. Do a show or a movie. People love Nick Cage, and I think that'd be a lot of fun. And I think Cage would totally do it. There's a scene that I've always wanted to see done in live action with Ghost Rider, and it's pulled from the Fantastic Four animated series, where Ghost Rider does his thing where he makes you feel the pain that you've caused others, and he does it to Galactus. That would be awesome to see in live action. So hopefully we get it sooner rather than later, get some Ghost Rider, and hopefully they tie it in with whatever they're doing with Mephisto and give us like a Midnight Suns show or movie eventually that is rated R or TVMA, have Blade in there, Moon Knight, hell, throw in Doctor Strange, or hey, you could throw in Agatha or Wanda or Billy maybe. That would be cool. Yeah. So I hope so. I hope we see Ghost Rider. I'm not sure which one it will be, but I'll take any. I'll take any. All right. Thank you so much for that question. And thank you so much for being a channel member, which guarantees your question is answered right here on the show. And it supports the show and makes it possible for us to keep this thing running. And all right, that'll wrap it up for this episode of Ask Colton. I appreciate all of you so much for watching. I appreciate you sending in questions to the askcoltonnow@gmail.com email address, where any one of you can submit a question. I try to go through them all, and I pick the ones that I think I have an interesting answer to that you guys would enjoy hearing me talk about. So if I don't pick your question, it's not your fault. It's my fault that I didn't have an interesting response. And but if you do want to guarantee your question gets answered, you can become a channel member, which supports the show. But becoming a channel member, I view that as thank you so much for supporting the show financially, and I feel like I owe you, like I'm gonna answer your question. So I'm not trying to like trick anyone to, well, if you want your question answered, you better give me some money. No, I'm just saying that I want to answer everybody's questions, and I can't. I wish I could, but I can't. But if you're somebody who is generous enough and able to, you know, use your hard-earned money to support the show in that way, I appreciate it so much. And I think the least I can do is answer your question. So yeah. All right. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.